right, and I'm just going to give a second for people to filter in. Good evening, everybody. We're just going to give it a second to let everyone filter on in, and then we'll get started. All right. All right, that seems good. All right, well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us at another one of our DFAS programs. This is one of our mock lectures with one of our fantastic professors on campus. Just some quick housekeeping before we get started. We will be going over this mock lecture for about 40 to 50 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A afterwards, but please feel free to send any questions your way via the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and I'll be fielding those questions to Professor Stauffer as we go through. And to get started, with us today, we have William L. Stauffer, Jr. Esquire, who is a Clinical Associate Professor Emeritus for the Raymond A. Mason School of Business here at William & Mary. He was until February of 2017, when he retired from the active practice of law, a senior trial partner / shareholder, and then of counsel with the Williams Mullen Law Firm, resident in its Newport News, Richmond, and Tysons, Virginia offices. Professor Stauffer is a graduate of the Penn State and Marshall Wythe School of Law here at William & Mary. His law practices focused on complex business trials and disputes, primarily involving the financial institution, mortgage banking, and real estate industries. He has decades of experience litigating matters in state and federal courts and is admitted to practice law in the Commonwealth of Virginia and prior to 2019, the District of Columbia. And for almost 25 years, Mr. Stauffer was managing partner or office managing partner of local, regional, or national law firms. In August of 2014, after a national search had been conducted by William & Mary, Mr. Stauffer was elected to be a full-time clinical associate professor. He continued to teach the legal environment of business, ethical advocacy, and critical legal issues for business and advanced business law courses. In 2015, 2017, and again in 2019, Professor Stauffer received the Faculty Excellence Award from the College of William & Mary's BBA classes of 2015, 2017, and 2019, respectively. And in 2019, he was selected by the Bishop James Madison Society to present his final lecture, an honor extended to one departing professor or staff member with an exceptional reputation for service to the university and beyond. And then the Board of Visitors awarded Professor Stauffer emeritus status as of the fall of 2019. And with that, I will let him get started with his lecture tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. I appreciate it. And it's great to have everybody on this webinar tonight. I just wish I could see you in person. Earlier today, I was on a Zoom session in which someone asked me to describe my association with William & Mary. And I said, well, thinking back, it was actually 50 years ago, this coming fall, that I began as a law student at William & Mary. It was my first time to Williamsburg, Virginia. And what an experience. It's hard for me to believe that 50 years has passed. I thoroughly enjoy taking part in these Days for Admitted Students program. I wish it was live because I wish I could see families and students immediately after this presentation and talk with you. So let me offer this up to you, and this may be a little different from any other program you've taken part in. You are welcome to reach out to me at any time. You can go to the faculty directory at the Mason School of Business, look under emeritus, that's code for old. And you'll see me with my email address, but it's william.stauffer@mason.wm.edu. I'm happy to help in any way I can. Okay, so we're going to talk tonight, I believe, in storytelling. It's the most effective way to convince or persuade a jury, a judge, or teach students, whether at school or at home. And I'm a father of 3 and a grandfather of 6. Our students will lead organizations in sizes ranging from small to global over the next 2 generations. That's an amazing amount of responsibility. I'm delighted to spend a few minutes with you today giving you my thoughts on the critical nature and importance of ethics. It's given a lot of lip service, frankly, but we continue to have issues. These thoughts have been formed over 43 active years of the practice of law, with really a front row seat in the courtrooms and boardrooms across the United States, and 10 years in the classrooms of America's second oldest university here at William & Mary. Pretty exciting. And when we talk about ethics, it's more than fitting to have this discussion about integrity and character at the birthplace of the oldest academic honor code in this country, dating back 285 years to 1736. Just amazing heritage. The issues are pretty simple. These are not complicated issues. It's this. And for our admitted students listening to this tonight, this is really directed to you. Do we have the character and the personal integrity to make the right choice, to do the right thing in business and in life? Is ethical leadership truly a competitive advantage in the marketplace? I hope I convince you tonight that it is the competitive advantage. It's something we need to strive for. So I have a few stories tonight. As I said, I believe in storytelling. These are all true, and there's valuable lessons to be learned, as I'll tie together at the end. First, I want to talk about McKinsey and Company. Global business, often described as the consultant to blue chip corporations and governments around the world. This is one great consulting company. However, in February of this year, the New York Times had an article entitled, McKinsey settles for $573 million over role in opioid crisis. That's McKinsey paying $573 million. It was revealed that McKinsey had agreed to a settlement and consent judgment for helping its client, Purdue Pharma, the manufacturer of OxyContin painkillers, turbocharge opioid sales. And this marketing effort continued even after Purdue Pharma had pled guilty in 2007 to federal criminal charges that had misled doctors and regulators about the risk of OxyContin. I don't know if you remember the origin of OxyContin and why it got into trouble originally, but it had proclaimed to the medical community that it had come up with a wonder drug, a painkiller, that was going to not have the same addictive qualities as other painkillers. It would be in a time-released fashion. Problem was that Purdue Pharma knew it was a lie when it sold that story. So McKinsey is helping them with their marketing plans and programs. And McKinsey is claimed to have caused and contributed to the opioid crisis, including the targeting of prescribers who wrote the most prescriptions for the most patients, making the most money for their clients. And one such plan was the turbocharge Purdue sales engine, designed to significantly increase Purdue's sales of OxyContin. McKinsey came up with sales drivers based on the idea that opioids reduce stress and make patients more comfortable and less isolated. At least these, according to claims made in a lawsuit filed in 2018 by the state of Massachusetts. Now, why is this current settlement announced just 2 months ago with attorney generals in 47 states and the District of Columbia and 5 territories significant? Well, according to the New York Times article, quote, it shatters the distance that McKinsey, which argues it only made recommendations, puts between its advice and its clients' actions. The ramifications for consulting companies and you as leaders are staggering. McKinsey had no role in the development or ownership of OxyContin. It's not a pharmaceutical company, but it's agreed to pay $573 million for its role in helping its client turbocharge marketing efforts to increase sales. And doing that even after its client had pled guilty. And it was common knowledge that the drug, OxyContin, was part of an opioid epidemic in the United States. When I first read this article, I went back to take a look at the consent judgment, which had been filed. The one I looked at was in Delaware. Interestingly, what McKinsey had agreed to is that it had, or rather the allegations against it were based on consumer fraud under state consumer fraud law. And so I thought, well, where does this end exactly for liability? How about with the advertising agencies, TV, radio ads, accounting and legal advice? Are they all potentially liable too? What I want to underscore here is there's a real potential risk in healthcare and other heavily regulated industries for consultants and advisors to those industries. I think where McKinsey missed the boat is it should have been thinking more carefully about how the advice that was given and the decisions that were being made then would look years later, now on the front page of the New York Times, on a lead article in Google, or frankly, in front of a jury or a grand jury. I wonder what those folks were thinking when they came up with the turbocharging plans. It doesn't look very good today. Next thing I want to talk about is, and you're willing and you're happy to send in any questions you have, just use the Q&A or the chat and we'll take them up. If we were doing this live, I could see you, you could put your hand up and I could stop and answer your questions, but I can't do that in a webinar. The second story I want to talk about is Wells Fargo. Now, Wells Fargo at one point in time, not too long ago, had a storied brand and reputation as any financial institution in the United States. Then in fall of 2016, we learned from a consent order filed with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that the bank's sales practices, previously well respected and envied and rewarded by Wall Street, had resulted in a public disclosure of what the CFPB described as unfair and abusive practices of the bank against its own customers, and an obligation for Wells Fargo to pay a $100 million fine. So let's take a look at this. So I remember reading about this and saying, well, this is big news. I wonder why Wells Fargo is paying $100 million. And here, this is the consent order, part of the consent order. It's 26 pages long that Wells Fargo signed off. But here are the allegations that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau made. One, it opened unauthorized deposit accounts for existing customers and transferred funds to those accounts from the owner's other accounts, all without their customers' knowledge or consent. Applied for credit cards in the consumer's name without the consumer's information, using consumers' information without their knowledge or consent, etc. So I think the easiest way to get some background on this is to, well, what was going on here exactly? Well, here's the answer. These are the allegations made by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that Wells Fargo signed off on. Wells Fargo sought to distinguish itself in the marketplace as a leader in cross-selling. Nothing, absolutely nothing wrong with that. In my profession as a lawyer, I was part of some larger Am Law 200 law firms. And of course, you know, if you did a great job for someone on a business trial, and if you had the opportunity to introduce the client to your colleagues at the firm who handled employment matters, intellectual property matters, and environmental matters, cross-selling is what businesses do. And Wells Fargo did it well. I believe the numbers is that Wells Fargo had an average of 5 or 6 accounts per customer. Now, that's a significant number of accounts per customer when the national trend was probably about 3 accounts per customer. And Wall Street rewarded those cross-selling efforts accordingly with better stock prices. And so how did they do it? Well, it set goals and implemented sales incentives to increase the number of banking products and services that its employees sold. The problem was, as we see in number 9, thousands of Wells Fargo's employees engaged in improper sales practices. Well, what did they do? In a nutshell, suppose I'm a customer of Wells Fargo. I have a checking account and I have $500 in my checking account. My consumer representative at the bank says, you know, Mr. Stauffer, you need a second checking account, maybe a savings account. And I say, no, I'm not really interested in it. Well, the salesperson sets it up anyway and transfers some money out of my checking account into those other 2 accounts. Well, maybe you're saying, well, no harm, no foul. It's still my money. Here's the problem. I had one account. Now I have 3 accounts. And next month, when I get a statement, I get 3 statements, and I see that I've been charged an insufficient funds or insufficient balance fee because the first account and only account I had required me to maintain $500 in it, or else there was a minimum balance fee charged. Okay, well, that happened, or things like this happened 3 million times. Pretty serious. Credit cards, over 600,000 credit card applications were taken out without the customer's knowledge or consent. Now, again, you get a credit card in the mail saying, congratulations, you've got a new credit card. Maybe again, you're thinking, well, again, no harm, no foul. If I don't use it, it doesn't cost anything. Well, not so. The fact is that for every additional credit card you open, it may impact your credit score. And suppose, because there's an additional now line of credit available to you, which means potential additional debt. Suppose that weekend you're going out to shop for a car loan. The car dealership does a credit check, and it comes back that you're eligible for, I'm making this up, a personal loan at 6.35%. What you don't know is that because the new credit card was issued, you could have gotten a loan for 6%. And so now you're paying additional interest charge for a credit card you didn't ask for. Okay, I think you're getting the sense here. Mr. Stump, John Stump, who at the time was the bank's chairman and CEO, who incidentally resigned 30 days after this consent judgment was entered. He was a great promoter of the bank's slogan, 8 is great. And so there was pressure on Wells Fargo people to make sure that each of their customers had 8 accounts because 8 is great. Okay, again, there's a valuable lesson here for all of us about setting goals. And I think the first thing I'm going to say is make sure they're reasonable, because as we're going to see, pushing down the 8 is great program on the Wells Fargo people caused thousands of their people to commit fraud. That's not what you want to have happen. And I want to show you something else. This is a sad story about the victims. So it's easy to think about the customers who had to pay extra fees, or their credit scores were out of whack because of the additional credit card taking. But what about some of the people at Wells Fargo who worked there? I've highlighted some of this. They face, a number of them say, this was an article, again, by the New York Times. Number of them said they faced a stark choice: create new accounts by any means possible or risk being fired. It was as simple as that. And we're talking about people here who are routinely making somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000 a year and didn't have the luxury of having a lot of other jobs available to them. Okay, so it was either produce those 8 accounts per customer or lose your job. So the New York Times interviewed a number of folks. I just want to point out a couple. Here, Angie Payden in Wisconsin, she outlines here in 4 things that she was required to do. And what happened to her, she said, I started having panic attacks. And so what did she do? She started drinking hand sanitizer that was in the bank. By late November of 2012, she was addicted to hand sanitizer, drinking at least a bottle a day. I can't imagine what that must be like. Another person here said he would hide in the men's room crying, thought he was having a heart attack, had to leave. This person said that even though they reached their sales goals, it was never enough. Every morning I had to sit with my boss and go over the previous day and every single customer's relationship. I had to tell them why I didn't force them into opening the 3rd, 4th, 5th checking account. I was so stressed out I developed shingles. Well, it goes on. And this idea that you need to create new accounts or else risk being fired for falling short of sales goals. Well, what exactly does that do? The bank's sales practices of selling more products to its customers which had been a factor in its success, at least as far as its stock prices were concerned, was described as a sales culture which had eventually spiraled out of control. How did having a goal of 8 is great and pushing cross-selling goals end up with these problems? Well, here's a suggestion for you. When you're in the C-suite someday, which you will be, when you're setting goals for other people, particularly those who are subordinates to you, be mindful that the goals are reasonable and achievable, and get input from those that are going to be affected by it. I suspect if John Stump had reached out to the lower rungs of Wells Fargo and said, what do you think? Can we get 8 accounts out of each of our customers? He'd have got a resounding, you've got to be kidding me. We're already pushing maximum, getting more accounts per customer than anybody in the trade. There's no more to be had. Maybe this problem wouldn't have happened. Maybe Wells Fargo wouldn't have paid $100 million fine. I asked Jim Brinkley, and for those of you who get to walk through the Miller Hall someday, Brinkley Commons is named after James Brinkley, who's a 1959 graduate of the university and vice chairman, or had been vice chairman of Morgan Stanley Smith Barney's Global Wealth Program. He addressed our students, and I asked him what he thought went wrong. And he said, you put your clients first. Wells Fargo wasn't doing right for its clients. Quote, it set goals that abused its customers. End of quote. That's not ethical conduct. Cheating and harming your customers. Okay, next thing I want to talk about is Volkswagen. I'm a car guy, so I love talking about car issues. So Volkswagen, world brand, invested part of its future here in the United States, at least this was several years ago, in its new clean diesel engine program. Okay, I can remember that. There was a divergence of people going to hybrids, some thinking that electric cars were going to be the future, and Volkswagen saying, no, our clean diesel is going to be the way to do this. However, it realized it could not design a diesel engine that would meet strict nitrous oxide emission standards required by the United States, and at the same time attract customer demand for a car that had performance and fuel economy. You couldn't do both. You couldn't meet the nitrous oxide emission standards and get great performance and fuel economy. It didn't work with Volkswagen's diesel engine. So what did Volkswagen do? Well, instead of fixing the problem or disclosing that it had a problem and what it was going to do about it, it installed a software function, an emission defeat device to cheat US emission standards. And this is the way this worked. The software that was installed recognized when a vehicle was undergoing US emissions testing on a dynamometer, or when it was being driven onto the road under normal driving conditions. So when it detected it was being tested, the vehicle performed in one mode with the emissions system activated. As soon as it detected it was normal driving conditions, it operated in a different mode, turning off the emissions system, causing the car to emit nitrous oxide at levels up to 40 times higher than US standards. Nitrous oxide has been linked to causing emphysema, bronchitis, and other respiratory diseases. Volkswagen had sold over 590,000 diesel engines in the United States that contained the cheating software. So what was the result of that? Volkswagen settles emissions cheating cases for $14.7 billion. These are just the cars in the United States, and agrees to buy back cars. Okay, that was in June of 2016. Was that the end of it for them? I'm afraid not for them. At the same time, or rather half a year later, Volkswagen agrees to plead guilty to 3 federal felonies involving the Clean Air Act and pay $4.3 billion in criminal and civil penalties to the federal government. and 6 of their executives were indicted here in the United States. One was, I believe, either pled guilty or found guilty, but has been extradited back to Germany. The others all conveniently found themselves in Germany and could not be arrested here in the United States. So Volkswagen says that to date, it estimates that this emission cheating software scandal has costed $38 billion. And today there are pending civil and criminal cases in Germany against some of the former executives. Question you have to ask yourself is, Volkswagen think they'd never get caught? I mean, this is almost comical to talk about this. There's a whole story behind this as to why they thought they could get away with it. Not that they didn't think they wouldn't get caught, but the fine wouldn't be such a big deal because this has happened in the past, and previously the fines were minor. And they just considered it a cost of doing business. This time they got caught. All right, let's move out of cars and talk about character in a different setting. And I want to talk briefly about the Atlanta public schools cheating scandal. In 2008, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution published an article about cheating in public school exams. Eventually, this led to the indictment, criminal indictment against the Atlantic Public School Superintendent Beverly Hall and 34 other educators. Criminal indictments against school teachers. Let's take a look at it. This is the first page of the indictment. Unless you're well experienced in criminal cases, a lot of this won't make a lot of sense, but the first claim that's being brought that the grand jury found probable cause for was violation of Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act in Georgia. Pretty serious charges. So what was happening here? School performance in the public schools, particularly in certain sections of Atlanta in the elementary schools, were dropping. There was a press to meet certain standards. And Beverly Hall, who was recognized nationally as an authority on successful education reform, headed the system in Atlanta for the Atlantic Public Schools as its superintendent. And her situation was, she said, there won't be any excuses. Your schools and you teachers, your kids will hit these goals. And if they don't, you don't have a job and your school may close. Okay, so what happened? Well, the charges were that the individuals that were indicted conspired to make student performance look better than it actually was. Well, how do you do that? By cheating on the state exams, hiding the cheating, and retaliating against whistleblowers. There were cheating parties where teachers would get together, take the exams that their students had completed, and change the answers so that they could make sure that the students and the school met what was required. In some cases, sealed exams were opened in advance of the exams being taken, and students being shown the exams and told what the questions and answers would be. Why would teachers do this? Well, one allegation is that the individuals received performance bonuses, that if their class and their school hit the targets, there was money to be had. And in fact, the allegations were that there were hundreds of thousands of dollars in performance bonuses paid based on these fraudulent scores. The teachers who were indicted also said, look, we were doing this because we thought that this would help our students feel better about themselves. I wanted to keep my job. I wanted my students to be proud, etc. But let's take a look at what a judge had to say about this during sentencing as to who the real victims were. So this is an article in April 2015. Beverly Hall, the former superintendent, had died of cancer, so she was not tried. But here we have an article about those who were convicted and sentenced. Judge Baxter was presiding at this trial, and he, quote here says, "Everybody starts crying about these educators. This was not a victimless crime that occurred in the city. Everyone knew cheating was going on and your clients promoted it. No one has taken responsibility." And as he said, these stories are incredible. These kids can't read, end of quote. In the indictment, there was an allegation about a mother who started seeing her daughter's, I think it was a daughter's, scores improve significantly. Of course, was greatly impressed and proud of her daughter. But the problem was is that when the daughter would read or do a problem at home, there didn't seem to be any improvement, and certainly no improvement like that matched these scores. The woman went to see Beverly Hall and said, "This can't be. These grades cannot be accurate. My student is not learning at that level," and was basically poo-pooed by Beverly Hall, not to worry about it. The real victims there are those kids. We're 10 years after the fact or more. It's hard to say what the ultimate price is going to be for that. Okay, I want to move to another car matter, and that's General Motors. Okay, so I love pictures. They're so much better than me talking about it. So,
Professor Sauer, I have a question.
Go ahead.
It seems, I mean, through the stories that you're sharing with us, it seems a lot of this is a reflection on the leadership rather than the subordinates. And I know that you mentioned it earlier. So I guess what are the most important tenets for effective ethical leadership?
Well, the culture of ethics starts at the top. There's just no question about it. And right. For our future students sitting in on this call, someday this is going to be you. You're going to be the leader, and people are going to be looking at you and watching you. You may have dozens of manuals and policies and procedures book, which are important in your organization, telling you things to do and not do. Couldn't be any clearer, but they're going to watch you. And if you cheat, if you steal, you discriminate, you harass, it doesn't matter what the policies and procedures are. You're going to have people who do that in your organization. Whereas if you are absolutely a stickler about doing things right, no surprise, generally speaking, so will your organization as you go downstream, doing the same thing. The problem, Mr. Kenton, though, that we don't often talk about is, well, what happens if I'm 23 years old in my first job and I see something that I don't think is proper? In fact, it goes exactly against the policies and procedures of the company. And I take it up with my superior who says, don't rock the boat. Or worse, says, if you keep complaining about this, you don't have a job here. What do you do? Well, I want to address that at the very end, because those are situations we all face. But the culture of ethics starts at the top. That's where it must be. And the lesson from every one of these stories tonight shows that these people had the ability to do the right thing. And for whatever reason or the justification they come up with, they don't. And the effects are profound. We may get to Walmart and $24 million worth of bribe payments in Mexico that ended up costing them close to $1 billion in cost for $24 million worth of bribe payments. So sometimes the consequences of these actions are astronomical compared to what the original thing was. But it goes on and on and on, and people hide their heads in the sand. They take action against whistleblowers. They hope it goes away. It never does. I appreciate you asking me the question.
No problem. And the teaching scandal, or the cheating scandal, I suppose, was that first, I guess, allegation, the racketeering, that was similar to that's the same charge that was brought against the college admissions scandal, wasn't it?
Slightly different. There we had bribery of college officials where the colleges were recipients of federal funds. So the allegation is that there was actual bribery by a payment to an official who made a decision to admit a student. There were also income tax consequences here of paying. The promoter of this whole thing would talk one of his clients into making, let's make up a number, a $400,000 contribution to his nonprofit educational organization. That money was being funneled through somewhere. And so the folks would take a write-off for charitable contributions. So you had briberies and you had tax evasion issues. A little, not as much sympathy, frankly, for the folks who are involved with that. My heart goes out to the teachers in the Atlantic public school system. This could be anywhere.
Right.
Who wanted their kids to do well, who knew the goals were absolutely stupid, and their choice was to either quit and go somewhere else or take part in a fraud to meet the goals because the person at the top wasn't going to listen to them.
And I can only imagine if that were to be happening right now during a pandemic, during so much virtual education, even more ramifications coming from that. But I will let you get back to it.
Okay, well, let me show you. This is a keychain. So here's your key and your ignition, folks. For those of you who still have keys that fit into the ignition switch of your car. As you can see here, somebody's got a number of rings with things dangling from it. Okay, let's suppose you have one of these and you have an early 2002 to 2005, not an early, a 2002 to 2005 small General Motors car. And you're driving from Richmond, Virginia to Williamsburg, Virginia on Interstate 64 at 70 miles an hour. All right, your right knee touches the bottom of that keychain and the fob and all the things are hanging on it. There's a little jostle of the key and the car turns off. The ignition switch is turned off. All right, now you're going 70 miles an hour and maybe you're thinking you can start the car. Well, if you've got an automatic transmission, you're not going to. It's going to have to be in park to start it. All right, so you can't restart the car. Well, what about your brakes and your power steering? Well, you don't have power steering and power brakes anymore because the car's turned off. You may have some semblance of control, but not much. All right, now the problem is this, as you're hurtling along, as you're about to run into somebody ahead of you or a bridge abutment, maybe you're saying to yourself, thank goodness, at least my airbags will save me. Well, guess what? When the car's turned off, the airbags don't deploy. That's the way it's designed. And so General Motors started getting notice that their cars were turning off, okay, and their airbags weren't deploying, and people were starting to die. Amazing as this may sound, General Motors viewed it at first as a customer inconvenience issue, not a safety issue. As remarkable as this may sound, none of the General Motors engineers or other personnel connected the dots of cars shutting off and airbags not working. As of July of 2015, 124 deaths were attributed to this defect. General Motors reported then that it expected to spend upwards of $600 million in claim payments. More recently, General Motors has paid more than $2.6 billion in penalties and settlements. What happened here exactly? And I'll show you what happened. Look at this. Now, when you put your key into the ignition, I know you all have done this hundreds, thousands, 10,000s of times. You put your key in, you turn the key to the right clockwise. There's a certain amount of tension when you do that. For the car to turn on, then you release it and it flops back into, I think, the on position. And to turn the car off, you have to turn it counterclockwise, and there's a certain amount of pressure associated with moving the key. Well, how does that pressure come about? It's because of a spring. in the switch detent plunger. Okay, now what happened here? Look at the one on the bottom. You see it's slightly longer. Well, slightly longer spring means greater tension. And for whatever reason, in 2002, an engineer at General Motors said, well, you know what? I'm guessing it was probably to save money. We can save money by having a shorter spring. And so they ended up using what you see as a top spring. Now, it was a difference of, according to this schematic, 1.6 millimeters. Not much of a difference. However, a tremendous difference in tension. And so he prescribed this particular shorter spring for the General Motors cars, and apparently didn't tell anybody about it. It took 11 years before somebody figured out that what had happened was that this shorter spring had been called for, and it should have been a longer one with greater tension. How did all this happen within a company as respected as General Motors? Well, the good news, I don't have to give you my version of it. I had access to, this is a matter of public record, the almost 300-page report to the board of directors by its counsel, Jenner and Block. Okay, and I wanted you to see what they said, and this was then made public. A General Motors engineer chose to use an ignition switch in certain cars that was so far below its own standards that it failed to keep the car powered, resulting in moving stalls as well as loss of power on rough terrain. Okay, continuing, highlighted, sophisticated engineers at General Motors did not understand one of the most fundamental consequences of the switch failing and the car stalling. The airbags would not deploy. The failure of the switch meant the drivers were without airbag protection at the time they needed it most. They described this as General Motors, GM's personnel's inability to address the ignition switch problem for over 11 years is a history of failure. Although everyone had responsibility to fix the problem, no one took responsibility. It was an example of what one top executive described as the GM nod, when everyone nods in agreement to a proposed plan of action and then leaves the room and does nothing. And in fact, if you read the report, which is available online, you'll see that this situation was discussed month after month by experienced and talented engineers and business leaders. Apparently, at the end of each session, there would be the GM nod where everyone would nod their heads that we need to do something about this, and nobody did anything about it. All right, well, I see that we are moving quickly to the end of our time. I had a couple of other stories to tell you, but you can see I got caught up in the storytelling. So let me make sure we have time for a couple questions, and I want to talk about a local story. These ethics issues are not, all global company stories. Here, back in Hampton Roads here in 2015, I remember reading an article entitled, quote, "Local Financial Advisor Under Investigation for Fraud." And I've taken out the person's name because I never followed up to see what the status was. And I don't want to accuse someone of a crime if they weren't convicted of it or didn't plead guilty to it. The article begins, "On the surface, John Smith looks like a local businessman who has made it big. His face is on the cover of books offering financial advice. His voice was broadcast on radio stations here and more than 24 other markets around the country. In describing how she invested more than $100,000, an 88-year-old woman from Hampton said she had no reason to believe her money was in jeopardy until the FBI came to her house to ask her about investments. Her daughter said, quote, I find it hard to believe even now because Smith is like your best friend. He's like a part of the family when he comes over and he's chit-chatting and he's talking," end of quote. This is not an isolated one-off story. This is not an indictment by me of the financial services industry or advisory industry, but it is a story that's near and dear to my heart because it happened to my own parents. They too had a financial advisor looking out for their best interest who convinced them over a period of time to take their money out of federally insured CDs and instead invest in higher rate of return collateralized notes. As my mom and dad were told, only stupid people keep their money in banks. And as parents are apt to do, they didn't want to discuss it with their lawyer son. I'm at that age, by the way, where my kids are all in their late 30s to mid 40s, where they want to give advice to dad also. So I have to remember this story to listen. So in actuality, these smart investments were unsecured, uninsured investments. My parents had no idea what they were getting themselves into, none. The advisor made multiple trips to their house. My parents were both blue collar workers. They both died without recovering one penny of that money they earned and saved over a lifetime. 80% of what they owned was swindled from them. And it happens every day. When I was a young lawyer in Northern Virginia, and I loved almost every day of practicing law in that area for 35 years. I had the opportunity to represent an investment banking group headed by a group of really remarkably talented people from Wall Street and Washington, D.C. The investments they were doing were across the country. They were wide-ranging and diverse. It was really an eye-opening experience for me. One day I commented to the president of the company about some particularly interesting product that one of the companies being considered was producing. And he said to me, essentially, here's a lesson for you. So learn it now while you're young. We invest in management, not the company's products and services. The character of management is everything. Character of management is everything. And how true that advice has turned out to be in my experience as an attorney. When someone tells you in their view that an ethics issue is a gray area, remember what Professor Stauffer has told you tonight. There are no gray areas in ethics. It's either right or it isn't. Don't fall into the trap of sidestepping a tough ethics issue by calling it a gray area. Do the right thing, make the right choice, even if unpopular, difficult, or unprofitable in the short term. And I want to tell you now, just because you do the right thing doesn't mean you get rewarded short term. You may get fired. You may get blacklisted. People may not want to hire you because you're a whistleblower, but you're going to have to decide early on in your life what you're going to stand for. From my perspective, there's nothing more important in business and in life. I don't think the two are separate than your personal integrity. It's the greatest attribute of a successful leader. It will distinguish you. It will see you through tough times. It's the only way to lead your life and conduct your business. It is a competitive advantage. From my perspective, it is the competitive advantage in the marketplace. Now, from those stories we listened to tonight, they're all true. It's highly unlikely that any of those people got up one morning, looked in the mirror and said, today I do evil. It just doesn't work that way. Good people don't become bad people overnight. These people, I'm sure many of them are MBA students, doctors, accountants, graduates of fine schools. How did this come about? I'll tell you how it comes about. It's because it's the everyday chipping away at one's moral fiber, one small, gray, unethical decision at a time. They mount up quickly. They do. Each of us possesses the knowledge to make correct choices and do the right thing. I encourage you to stand for honesty, honor, and integrity in everything that you do. That's how you'll be known. It's much like that old adage, stand for something or fall for anything. Ladies and gentlemen, a real pleasure being with you tonight. If we have some questions, I'm happy to take them. Most importantly, I wish our students much, much happiness and success at William and Mary, and please do reach out to me.
Great. And so if you guys have any questions as you've been attending, please feel free to throw them in and we'll ask them. We'll give it a few minutes. And if not, then we'll let everyone get back to their evening. Professor Stauffer, do you want me to share your email in the chat so that people can contact you?
Sure.
Great.
Sure. Absolutely. Does anyone have any questions?
On them.
I see 3 chat, but I'm unable to read it. Are you able?
One said that you, from Joe, you and your wife made a great decision 50 years ago in regards to you choosing William.
That's for the students out there. That's a comment from Joe Wilk, WILCK, who is our tremendously talented and much younger data analytics professor at the Mason School of Business. Thank you, Joe.
And then the other comments are just feel free to pass along questions. With that, if anyone does have any questions that they want to ask, feel free to, contact Professor Stauffer directly, or you can pass them along to me and I would be more than happy to share with him afterwards. If you would like to attend this next week, you're more than welcome to. We will be doing this, I believe, next Wednesday as well. Let me pull up the calendar.
And I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll put in the stories that I didn't cover tonight, and we'll start with those. Plus, you can always see, did the stories remain exactly the same?
True. And I'll be there to know. I'll be there to listen as well. Well, Professor, this was very interesting. I really appreciate you taking the time to share these stories with our prospective students. We'll let you get back to your evening and we'll see you next week. All right.
Great. Good being with everyone tonight.
Good to be with you all. Have a good evening, everyone.